The stars had never looked so dark. Patricia Holloway stood at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel Endurance, watching the massive alien ships hang in Earth's orbit like steel mountains blocking out the light. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one was bigger than any ship humanity had ever built. Behind her, a small group of soldiers waited in their dress uniforms. They were the best Earth had to offer, chosen to represent humanity in what everyone knew would be the most important meeting in history. Among them was a quiet man named Daniel Cole. He was a sergeant from Kansas with tired eyes and rough hands. He had served in wars on Mars, on Titan, and in places most people had never heard of. He had buried friends in soil that was not Earth. He had followed orders he did not believe in. And now he stood here, waiting to see what would become of his species. The Valorians had arrived 3 months ago. They came without warning, their fleet appearing at the edge of the solar system like a storm rolling in across the plains. At first, humanity tried to communicate. Then they tried to negotiate. Then they tried to understand what these beings wanted. The answer was simple. The Valorians wanted everything Queen Vara of the Valorian Empire had broadcast. Her terms to every screen on Earth. Her image was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. She stood 8 feet tall, with skin like polished black stone and eyes that burned with violet light. Her voice did not need speakers. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating in the bones of everyone who heard it. Humanity would kneel, she said. Humanity would pledge loyalty to her throne. In exchange, humanity would be allowed to live. She showed them what happened to species that refused. Entire worlds burned to ash. Civilizations that had lasted for thousands of years wiped away in days. The Kethrani, the Eruvians, the Meldith. Names that meant nothing to humans, but each one had been a people with hopes and dreams and children who would never grow up. Earth's leaders debated for 3 days. Some wanted to fight. They said it was better to die free than to live as slaves. But the general showed them the numbers. The Valorian fleet could destroy every human ship in less than an hour. Their weapons could crack planets in half. Fighting was not courage. Fighting was suicide. So they chose to surrender. Patricia had been chosen to lead the delegation. She was good at her job. She had spent 20 years talking to people, finding common ground, building bridges between enemies. But she had never faced anything like this. As she looked at those alien ships, she felt small in a way she had never felt before. "Ambassador," one of her aides said, "the transport is ready." Patricia nodded and turned away from the window. She walked through the corridors of the Endurance, past the soldiers who would accompany her, past the diplomats who would witness whatever happened next. She tried to keep her face calm. Leaders were not supposed to show fear. The Valorian transport was waiting in the docking bay. It was sleek and silver, with no visible engines or windows. The door opened without a sound, revealing an interior that seemed to be made of light itself. Patricia stepped inside, followed by her team. Daniel Cole was the last to enter. He took one look back at the Endurance, at the human ship that suddenly seemed so small and fragile. And then the door closed behind him. The journey to the Valorian flagship took less than a minute. One moment they were in Earth's orbit. The next, they were somewhere else entirely. The transport door opened, and Patricia stepped out into a world she could never have imagined. The throne room of the Throne of Stars stretched for half a mile. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness. The floor was made of something that looked like glass, and it reflected the light of 1,000 floating lanterns. On either side of a long central path, thousands of alien beings stood in silence. They came in all shapes and sizes. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some had no solid form at all. But they all had one thing in common. They were all subjects of Valorian Empire. They had all knelt at the far end of the room. On a throne carved from a single massive crystal sat Queen Vera. She was even more terrifying in person. Her presence filled the room like heat from a fire. Patricia could feel it pressing against her, making it hard to breathe. She forced herself to keep walking, one step at a time, leading her delegation down that endless path toward the throne. The journey took 10 minutes. 10 minutes of walking in silence, with 10,000 eyes watching. 10 minutes of feeling smaller with every step. By the time Patricia reached the base of the throne, her legs were shaking. Queen Vera looked down at them. Her violet eyes moved slowly across the group of humans, studying them like a scientist might study insects. "So," she said, and her voice filled the entire room without effort. "These are the creatures who call themselves humanity. I have conquered 600 species. I have ruled this empire for 4,000 years. And in all that time, I have never seen beings quite so fragile." Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but Vera raised one clawed hand. "Silence. I did not give you permission to address me. You are here to accept your place in my empire. Nothing more." She stood, and somehow she seemed even taller than before. Her shadow fell across the human delegation like a dark cloud. "Kneel," she commanded. The word hit them like a physical force. Patricia felt her knees buckle. Around her, she heard the sounds of her team dropping to the floor. Generals who had led armies. Scientists who had unlocked the secrets of the universe. Diplomats who had faced impossible situations with calm smiles. They all fell to their knees, bowing their heads before the alien queen. Patricia knelt. She did not want to. Every part of her screamed against it. But she thought of Earth. She thought of the 8 billion people waiting to learn their fate. She thought of her daughter, who was only 12 years old. And she knelt. But one person did not. Daniel Cole remained standing. He was not sure why. His body wanted to kneel. His mind was screaming at him to drop to the floor like everyone else. But something deeper, something he could not name, refused to let him bend. He stood alone in a sea of kneeling figures, looking up at the most powerful being in the galaxy. And she looked back at him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Daniel had ever heard. Queen Vera stared at the standing human for a long moment. Her violet eyes narrowed. The floating lanterns in the throne room seemed to dim, as if the light itself was afraid of what might happen next. "How dare you, human?" she said. Her voice was cold enough to freeze blood. It echoed through the massive chamber, bouncing off walls that seemed to stretch into forever. Every alien in the room turned to look at Daniel Cole. Some of them gasped. Others made sounds of shock in languages no human had ever heard. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His hands wanted to shake, but he forced them to stay still at his sides. He had faced death before. He had stood on battlefields where the air itself was on fire. But he had never felt anything like the weight of this moment. "I have ended civilizations," Vera continued, descending from her throne. Each step she took made the floor vibrate beneath Daniel's feet. "I have burned worlds. I have erased species from existence so completely that not even memories of them remain. Empires that lasted for 10,000 years bowed before me and begged for mercy." She stopped just a few feet away from him. Up close, she was even more inhuman than he had realized. Her features were too sharp, like they had been carved from stone. Her movements were too smooth, like water flowing uphill. And her presence was too big, as if her body could barely contain whatever she really was. "And you," she said, looking down at him with something between amusement and fury. "You insignificant creature from a backwater world at the edge of nowhere, you dare to stand before me?" Daniel swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. But when he spoke, his voice came out steady. "With respect, Your Majesty, I don't kneel. The throne room exploded into chaos. Valorian guards surged forward from the shadows, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Alien nobles shouted in a dozen different languages. Patricia tried to get up from her knees, screaming something that Daniel could not hear over the noise. But Queen Vera raised one hand, and everything stopped. The guards froze in place. The shouting died. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. She had not raised her voice. She had not made any threat. She had simply lifted her hand, and the entire room obeyed. "Explain yourself," she said to Daniel. "You have perhaps 30 seconds before I decide whether to atomize you where you stand or make your death something more creative." Daniel took a deep breath. He thought about running. He thought about apologizing. He thought about dropping to his knees and begging for forgiveness. But none of those things felt right. "I'm a soldier, ma'am," he said. "I've been a soldier my whole adult life. I've followed orders. I've fought in wars I didn't believe in. I've watched friends die in places so far from home that it took their families months to get the news. I've done things I'm not proud of, and I've failed to do things I should have done." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I've never knelt. Not to generals who sent good men to die for bad reasons. Not to politicians who made promises they never planned to keep. Not to anyone who thought that having power made them better than the people under them." Vera tilted her head slightly, like a curious bird. "You compare me to your petty leaders? No, ma'am. You're nothing like them. You're bigger, stronger, older, more powerful than anything I could ever imagine." Daniel met her eyes, which was harder than anything he had ever done in his life. "But that doesn't change what I am. And what I am is a man who doesn't kneel. Not out of fear. Not for survival. Not for anyone. Even if your refusal means the death of your entire species?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Daniel felt the weight of it pressing down on him. 8 billion lives. Every human who had ever lived, every child who might ever be born, all of it resting on what he said next. "I can't speak for my species," he said quietly. "I'm just a sergeant. Nobody important. But if you're asking what I think, then yes. Even then, why?" It was a simple question, but it demanded a real answer. Daniel thought about it carefully. "Because if I kneel now, out of fear, then I'm not really alive anymore anyway. I'm just a thing that breathes and eats and does what it's told. And my people, if we survive by giving up everything that makes us who we are, then we haven't really survived at all. We've just delayed our end." Vera was silent for a long moment. The throne room remained frozen, every being in it waiting to see what would happen next. Patricia was still on her knees, tears streaming down her face. The other humans had their heads bowed, too afraid to look up. Then Queen Vera did something that no one expected. She laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, or a mocking one. It was the sound of genuine surprise, of unexpected delight. She laughed like someone who had just heard a joke for the first time in centuries. 4,000 years, she said, shaking her head slowly. 4,000 years I have ruled this empire, and in all that time, not one being has stood before me and spoken as you have spoken. They have begged. They have threatened. They have tried to bargain and plead and reason. But none of them, not one, has simply refused. She looked at Daniel with new interest, as if seeing him for the first time. "You are either the bravest creature I have ever met," she said, "or the most foolish. In my experience, those two things are usually the same." Daniel did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Vera turned and walked back toward her throne. But she did not sit down. Instead, she stood before it and looked out over the assembled crowd. "I have made a decision," she announced. "This human has shown me something I have not seen in millennia. He has shown me defiance without hatred, courage without arrogance, conviction without fanaticism, She turned back to face Daniel. I am going to give you a chance, Daniel Cole of Earth. A chance to prove that your species deserves something more than submission. It will not be easy. Many have tried similar tests and failed. Their worlds are ash now. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. What kind of chance? A trial, Vera said, and her smile was beautiful and terrifying. The axiom of worth, an ancient tradition of my people, reserved for those who challenge the foundations of our empire. If you succeed, humanity will be granted something no other species has ever received. If you fail, your world will burn, and your people will be scattered across the stars as slaves. Patricia finally found her voice. Your Majesty, please. He doesn't speak for us. He's just one soldier. Let us negotiate. Let us find another way. Vera did not even look at her. He spoke when no one else would. He stood when everyone else fell. That makes him the only voice that matters. She fixed her violet eyes on Daniel once more. Do you accept? Daniel thought about everything he had just said. About not kneeling. About standing for something, even if it meant losing everything. He had meant every word. And now those words were coming back to demand payment. Yes, he said. I accept. Vera nodded once. Then let it begin. Daniel Cole was taken to Valorix Prime, the capital world of the Empire. The journey took 3 days, traveling through something the Valorians called the Dark Roads, pathways between stars that folded space like paper. Daniel did not understand how it worked. He did not try to. He had more important things to think about. His quarters on Valorix Prime were nicer than any place he had ever lived. The room was large, with a bed that seemed to float above the floor and windows that showed views of an alien city stretching to the horizon. Purple clouds drifted across a green sky. Buildings made of crystal and light reached up like fingers toward the heavens. It was beautiful, and it reminded Daniel of how far from home he really was. On his first morning, a Valorian official came to see him. His name was Kelleth, and he was a tall reptilian creature with 4 arms and scales that changed color depending on his mood. Right now, they were a dull gray, which Daniel guessed meant he was not happy about his assignment. I have been ordered to prepare you for the axiom of worth, Kelleth said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. I must tell you that I consider this a waste of my time. You will fail, as all the others have failed, and your world will burn. But the Queen has commanded, so here I am. Nice to meet you too, Daniel said. Kelleth made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been an insult. It was hard to tell with aliens. Over the next few weeks, Kelleth explained what Daniel would face. The axiom of worth was an ancient Valorian tradition, used to test those who challenged the Empire's right to rule. It had 3 parts, one for the body, one for the mind, and one for the spirit. No one had passed all 3 tests in over 2,000 years. The test of body was combat. Daniel would fight a Valorian champion in an arena, with thousands of spectators watching. The champion's name was Tharek, and according to Kelleth, he had never lost a match. Tharek is faster than you, Kelleth said. Stronger than you. He has been training for combat since before your species learned to make fire. You have no chance of defeating him. So what am I supposed to do? Daniel asked. That is for you to discover. The test is not always about winning. The test of mind was a strategic simulation. Daniel would be given command of a small fleet and asked to fight against impossible odds. The simulation was designed by Valorian admirals who had been conquering worlds for centuries. They knew every trick, every tactic, every strategy that had ever been invented. You will lose every ship, Kelleth said. The question is how you lose them. And the test of spirit? Kelleth's scales turned a strange shade of blue. That is a conversation with the Queen herself. No one knows what she asks. Those who fail do not live to tell of it. Daniel spent his days preparing as best he could. He trained his body in the combat halls, pushing himself harder than he ever had before. He studied military history, reading about battles fought on 1,000 different worlds. And he tried to understand the Valorians, their culture, their values, what they considered worthy and what they considered weak. 1 month after his arrival, the day of the first test arrived. The arena was a massive structure in the heart of the capital city. 50,000 Valorians filled the seats, their eyes fixed on the empty fighting ground below. When Daniel walked out onto the sand, he felt very small. Tarek was waiting for him. The Valorian champion was 7 feet tall, with muscles that looked like they had been carved from rock. His skin was deep purple, and his eyes were the color of fresh blood. He wore no armor, carried no weapons. He did not need them. "Little human," Tarek said, his voice booming across the arena, "I will try to make this quick. It is the only mercy I can offer." Daniel did not respond. He took his position, raised his fists, and waited. The fight began. Tarek was fast. Faster than anything Daniel had ever seen. His first punch came like lightning, and Daniel barely managed to dodge it. The second punch caught him in the ribs, and he felt something crack. He flew backward, hitting the sand hard, the air driven from his lungs. The crowd roared. Daniel got up. Tarek hit him again, this time in the face. Blood sprayed from Daniel's nose. He tasted copper. His vision blurred. He fell. He got up. Again and again. Tarek knocked him down. Broken ribs. Broken nose. One eye swelling shut. Blood soaking into the sand. The pain was beyond anything Daniel had ever experienced. Every part of his body screamed at him to stay down, to give up, to let it end. But every time he fell, he thought about home. He thought about Kansas, about the endless fields of wheat swaying in the summer wind. He thought about his mother, who had died when he was young, and his father, who had worked himself to death trying to keep their farm alive. He thought about the people of Earth, 8 billion souls who were counting on him, even if they did not know it. And he got up. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. The wreck was breathing hard now. His punches were slower, less precise. He had never faced an opponent like this before. He had fought being stronger than himself, faster than himself, smarter than himself. But he had never fought someone who simply would not stop. "Yield," Tarek demanded, his chest heaving. "You have proven your courage. There is no shame in surrender." Daniel spat blood onto the sand. His legs were shaking. He could barely see out of his one good eye. Every breath was agony. "No," he said, and he charged again. Tarek caught him, threw him to the ground, and stood over him with his fist raised for a final blow. The crowd was silent now. No one was cheering anymore. They were watching something they had never seen before, a human who would not fall. Before Tarek could strike, a voice rang out across the arena. "Enough." Queen Vera stood in her private box, looking down at the two fighters. Her expression was unreadable. "The test is concluded," she announced. "The result is a draw." The crowd gasped. A draw had never happened in the history of the Axiom. It was supposed to be impossible. Tarek stepped back, lowering his fist. He looked at Daniel with something that might have been respect. "You are a fool," he said quietly. "But you are a worthy fool." Daniel tried to smile, but his face hurt too much. He simply nodded and let the medical team carry him away. He had passed the first test, but 2 more still waited for him, and he was not sure how much more his body could take. As the doctors worked to repair his broken bones, he closed his eyes and thought about home. He was not done yet. It took 2 weeks for Daniel to heal enough to face the second test. Valorian medicine was far beyond anything Earth had, and what would have kept him in a hospital for months was fixed in days. But the memories of the pain stayed with him. Every morning when he woke up, his body remembered what Tarek had done to it. The second test was different. There would be no blood, no broken bones. Just a simulation, a game of war played on screens and holograms. But Daniel knew that games could be just as deadly as real battles. Sometimes more so. The test took place in a massive chamber deep beneath the capital city. Holographic projectors lined the walls, ceiling, and floor, creating a perfect three-dimensional map of space. Stars glittered like diamonds. Planets hung like painted balls. And at the center of it all, Daniel stood at a command podium, watching the display. Kelleth was there, along with a dozen Valorian admirals who had come to observe. Their faces showed nothing, but Daniel could feel their doubt. To them, he was just a human, a primitive creature from a primitive world, playing at a game he could not possibly understand. "The scenario is simple," one of the admirals explained. "You will command a small defensive fleet. Your goal is to protect the civilian station from an attacking force. The enemy outnumbers you 5-1. They have superior weapons, superior shields, and superior tactics. No commander in our historical simulations has ever won this scenario. What's the best anyone has done?" Daniel asked. "Survived for 12 minutes. Destroyed 20% of the enemy fleet before being eliminated." Daniel nodded slowly. "And what am I being judged on?" "That is for the Queen to decide." The simulation began. Daniel's fleet appeared on the holographic display. 12 small ships arranged in a defensive pattern around a space station. In the distance, the enemy fleet was approaching, 60 warships moving in perfect formation. Daniel studied the display for a long moment. He thought about everything he had learned in his weeks on Valorix Prime. He thought about the battles he had fought as a soldier, not commanding fleets, but leading small groups of men through impossible situations. He thought about what it meant to fight when you could not win. And then he did something no Valorian commander had ever done. He ordered his ships to retreat. The admirals made sounds of surprise and disapproval. Kelleth's scales turned a bright orange, which Daniel had learned meant confusion. "He runs," one admiral said, "like a coward." But Daniel was not running. He was repositioning. He split his fleet into 3 groups, sending them in different directions. The enemy fleet, trained to chase and destroy, had to divide to follow. Suddenly, the 5-1 advantage was not so clear. Each group was now facing a smaller enemy force. Daniel's ships did not engage directly. Instead, they moved, constantly moving, using asteroids and debris for cover, making themselves difficult targets. Every time the enemy thought they had a clear shot, Daniel's ships would vanish behind a rock or slip into a sensor shadow. Meanwhile, Daniel was watching the enemy's patterns. He was learning how they moved, how they communicated, how they reacted to unexpected situations. And after 15 minutes of this strange dance, he saw what he was looking for: a gap. The enemy commander had been trained to fight fleets that stood and fought. He did not know how to handle an enemy that refused to engage. In his frustration, he had pushed his fastest ships too far forward, leaving a hole in his formation. Daniel struck. 3 of his ships, the smallest and fastest, shot through the gap at maximum speed. They were not aiming at the warships. They were aiming at the enemy command vessel, the big ship at the center of the fleet that was coordinating all the others. The enemy reacted too slowly. By the time they understood what was happening, Daniel's ships were already launching their weapons. They did not have enough firepower to destroy the command ship, but they did not need to. They hit its communication array. Suddenly, the enemy fleet was blind. The command ship could no longer send orders to its warships. The perfect formation fell apart as individual captains tried to decide what to do on their own. Daniel pressed the attack. His remaining ships swept through the confusion, striking at vulnerable targets, destroying ships that were out of position, causing chaos wherever they went. The enemy fleet, which had seemed so unstoppable, was now in disorder. In the end, Daniel lost all 12 of his ships. The civilian station was destroyed. By every technical measure, he had failed, but the final count showed that he had destroyed 37 of the 60 enemy warships before he fell. More than half. The chamber was silent when the simulation ended. The admirals stared at the holographic display, which showed the wreckage of both fleets scattered across space. "Impossible," one of them said. "He should not have lasted more than 10 minutes. He did not follow any standard tactics," another added. "He fought like a madman." "No," a third admiral said, his voice thoughtful. "He fought like someone who knew he was going to lose. He did not try to win. He tried to make victory cost as much as possible." Caleth's scales had turned a deep blue. He looked at Daniel with something that might have been respect. "In my culture," Caleth said slowly, "there is a concept called the worthy death. It is the idea that how you fall matters as much as whether you stand. You fought knowing you would lose, but you made your enemy bleed for every inch. That is not what we expected." Daniel shrugged. "Where I come from, we call it making them pay. If you're going to lose, you make sure the other side remembers you." The admirals argued for hours after the test ended. Some said Daniel had failed because he lost his fleet and the station. Others said he had shown more tactical creativity than any commander they had seen in centuries. In the end, they could not agree. The decision would be left to Queen Vera. That night, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, looking out at the alien city. His body had healed, but his mind was tired. 2 tests down, 1 to go. And the final test, the test of spirit, was the one that frightened him most. He did not know what the Queen would ask him. He did not know what answer she was looking for. All he knew was that everything depended on their conversation. He thought about Patricia and the other humans, waiting back on Earth for news. He thought about the billions of people going about their daily lives, not knowing that their fate rested on the shoulders of a sergeant from Kansas who had no business being here. He thought about what he would say to the Queen, and he realized that he could not prepare for this test. There was no strategy, no tactic, no trick that would help him. The test of spirit was about truth, and the only truth Daniel had was himself. He would have to hope that was enough. The garden floated above the clouds of Valorix Prime. Daniel had seen many strange things since leaving Earth, but this place was perhaps the strangest of all. Flowers bloomed in colors that had no names in any human language. Trees twisted into shapes that seemed to defy gravity. And above it all, stars were visible in the purple sky, even though it was the middle of the day. Queen Vera was waiting for him on a stone bench near a fountain that flowed with liquid light instead of water. She was not wearing her crown or her royal robes. In simpler clothes, she looked almost approachable, almost human, but her violet eyes still held the weight of 4,000 years, and her presence still pressed against Daniel like a physical force. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the bench beside her. Daniel walked over and sat down. His ribs still ached sometimes, a memory of his fight with Tharek. He ignored the pain and looked out at the garden, trying to find the right words for whatever was coming. "You passed the first test through stubbornness," Vera said. "Tharek hit you dozens of times. He broke your bones. He made you bleed. And still you got up. Again and again. Until even he was not sure he could put you down for good." She turned to look at him. "The second test, you passed through unpredictability. Our admirals have been studying tactics for longer than your species has existed. They know every move, every counter, every strategy that has ever been tried. But you did not fight the way they expected. You fought like someone with nothing to lose." Daniel nodded slowly. "Because I did have nothing to lose. If I failed, my world would burn. If I won, we might have a chance. There was no middle ground. Yes, Vera said. And that is precisely what made you dangerous. A being with nothing to lose is the most unpredictable thing in the universe. She was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars. The third test is different, she said. It is not about your body or your mind. It is about what you believe, what you value, what you would fight for, and what you would die for. She turned those violet eyes on him. Tell me, Daniel Cole of Earth, why does your species matter? Daniel had known this question was coming. He had thought about it every night since he arrived on Valorix Prime. He had prepared answers, practiced speeches, tried to find the perfect words to convince the Queen that humanity deserved to survive. But now, sitting here in this impossible garden, all those prepared answers seemed wrong. So he told her the truth. I don't know if we do, he said. Ver raised an eyebrow. That is not the answer I expected. I know, but it's the honest one. Daniel took a deep breath. Humanity is young. We've only been traveling between stars for a few hundred years. Before that, we spent most of our history fighting each other. Wars over land, wars over religion, wars over ideas that people forgot about before the bodies were even cold. He looked down at his hands. We've done terrible things. We've enslaved our own people. We've destroyed our own planet. We've built weapons that could wipe out everything we ever created. Half the time, I'm not sure we deserve to survive. Then why fight for them? Vera asked. Why stand in my throne room and refuse to kneel? Why endure thorax beating? Why risk everything for a species you yourself doubt? Daniel thought about the question carefully. He thought about Kansas, about the farm where he grew up, about the endless sky and the smell of wheat in the summer. He thought about his mother, who had taught him to read using old books she found in a forgotten library. He thought about his father, who had worked 18-hour days just to keep food on the table, never complaining, never giving up. Because we're trying, he said finally. That's all we've got. We're not wise like the old species you conquered. We're not strong like the Valorians. We're not ancient or powerful or particularly smart. But we keep trying. He met Vera's eyes. Every time we fail, we get back up and try again. Every time we destroy something, we try to build something better. Every time we fall short of what we could be, we look at ourselves and say, maybe tomorrow we'll do better. He shook his head slowly. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe it's never going to be enough. But it's what makes us who we are. We're the species that doesn't quit. We're the species that keeps getting up no matter how many times we get knocked down. And I think, maybe, that has to count for something. Vera was silent for a long time. The fountain bubbled quietly. The alien flowers swayed in a breeze that Daniel could not feel. In 4,000 years, she said at last, I have conquered 612 species. Each one believed their culture, their values, their way of life was worth preserving. The Kethrani thought their art would save them. The Eruvians thought their science would save them. The Meldith thought their faith would save them. They were all wrong. She stood and walked to the edge of the floating garden, looking down at the clouds below. But you are different. Not better. Different. You do not beg for mercy. You do not try to bargain or threaten. You simply refuse to accept the outcome that everyone else considers inevitable. She turned back to face him. That refusal is rare. In all my years, I have found it in perhaps a handful of individuals, but never in an entire species. Your people have something that cannot be measured or studied or replicated. A stubborn belief that tomorrow can be different from today. Daniel held his breath, waiting. Humanity will be granted autonomous status within the Empire, Vera announced. You will govern yourselves. You will make your own laws. You will choose your own path. Within limits, of course. You are not ready to be completely free. but you will not be slaves. Relief flooded through Daniel's body. He felt tears threatening to form in his eyes, but he held them back. In exchange, Vera continued, when the Empire calls, humanity will answer. We face threats that even we cannot handle alone. Ancient enemies from beyond the galaxy's edge. Forces that make my empire look like a candle flame in a hurricane. When those threats come, I will need allies who know how to fight against impossible odds. She smiled, and for the first time, it seemed almost warm. I believe humanity will be useful in that regard. Daniel stood and bowed his head slightly. Not a kneel, just a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. And if we refuse the call? He asked. Vera's smile widened. Then I expect you will fight. And honestly, I am curious to see what that would look like. 3 years later, Daniel was back on Earth, running a small farm in Kansas. He had turned down every offer of promotion, every political position, every request to become a symbol for humanity's new place in the galaxy. He just wanted to grow wheat and watch the sunset. But one evening, Patricia Holloway came to visit him. She was running something called the Galactic Relations Council now, and she looked tired. There's trouble, she said. Something is coming from beyond the rim. Something old and terrible. The Valorians are mobilizing their entire fleet. Daniel looked out at his fields, at the golden wheat swaying in the evening breeze. He thought about peace and quiet. He thought about the simple life he had built. Queen Vera is asking for you specifically, Patricia added. She says she needs someone who doesn't know how to stay down. Daniel sighed and turned back toward his house. Give me 10 minutes to pack, he said. He was never very good at staying down. And somewhere out there, among the stars, there were beings who needed to learn that about humanity. Daniel Cole was going to teach them.